Imagine a city so ancient that it existed before the pyramids of Egypt, before the hanging gardens of Babylon. A seemingly impenetrable fortress with walls reaching toward heaven, filled with wealth, commerce, and prosperity. But behind those massive walls lurked darkness, ritual sacrifice, sacred prostitution, and worship of false gods. Jericho was not merely a city, it was humanity's testament to its own power and ultimately a symbol of rebellion against God. What happened inside those walls and how they strangely fell down sends a powerful message that has been passed down through the ages and has reached us now. If you enjoy content that helps you grow spiritually, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join our community for more inspiration. Let's get started. Long before recorded history, when most of humanity still wandered as nomadic tribes, Jericho emerged as one of the world's first permanent settlements. Archaeological evidence dates this remarkable city to over 10,000 years ago, making it possibly the oldest continuously inhabited urban center ever discovered. What made Jericho possible when civilization elsewhere was still in its infancy? The answer lies in one precious resource: water. In the heart of the arid Jordan Valley, Jericho possessed something extraordinarily rare, a natural spring that never ran dry. This oasis in the desert created the perfect conditions for humans to settle, plant crops, and build a permanent home. Deuteronomy 34:3 refers to Jericho as the city of palm trees, a fitting description for this verdant paradise. The spring nourished lush palm groves alongside abundant wheat and barley fields. In a landscape dominated by harsh desert, Jericho appeared almost miraculous, a green jewel shimmering against the sand. The inhabitants of this ancient city were innovative pioneers. They developed sophisticated irrigation systems and invented new building techniques, constructing some of humanity's first stone walls and circular towers. The strategic location of Jericho, near the Jordan River and at a crossroads between major trade routes, transformed it into a hub of commerce. This prosperity should have been a blessing, an opportunity to honor the Creator who provided such abundance. Instead, as wealth accumulated behind Jericho's walls, something more insidious began to take root. As Jericho grew in wealth and influence, so did its defenses. The walls of Jericho weren't merely impressive, they were legendary. Archaeological excavations have revealed a remarkable feat of ancient engineering, a double wall system that would have appeared utterly impregnable to any approaching army. We all face moments when life's challenges seem as impenetrable as Jericho's walls, times when finding strength and direction feels impossible. During these seasons, understanding ancient spiritual truths can provide the breakthrough you're seeking. This is exactly what The Secret of Jesus' Apparitions offers, a path to clarity and peace through his revelations. This ebook goes into his prophecies and offers insight into what lies ahead. It's available for free in the pinned comment. Grab it now before the edition's gone. The outer wall, constructed of solid stone, rose approximately 16 feet, 5 meters, from the ground. Above this foundation stood a massive brick wall reaching another 23 feet, 7 meters, bringing the total height to almost 40 feet. The walls were also remarkably thick, wide enough for sentries to patrol along the top with ease. Adding to this intimidating defense, Jericho was built upon a natural hill, meaning attackers would need to charge uphill while facing defenders from above. But Jericho's true defensive genius lay in its self-sufficiency. Unlike most ancient cities, which could be starved into submission through prolonged siege, Jericho had its own internal water source. The city's storehouses brimmed with grain and provisions. Theoretically, Jericho could withstand a siege indefinitely. This physical security bred a spiritual complacency. The walls of Jericho became more than mere defenses. They were symbols of the city's perceived invincibility. The book of Joshua captures this mentality. Now, Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Joshua 6:1. This wasn't merely a description of physical preparation for war. It represented a spiritual closing of doors as well. The city had shut itself off from God, trusting in walls of stone rather than the Creator. Within Jericho's mighty walls flourished a society of remarkable abundance. The markets teemed with exotic goods from distant lands, spices from Arabia, fine textiles from Egypt, precious metals and gemstones from various corners of the ancient world. The city's elite adorned themselves in finery and dwelled in houses decorated with imported luxuries. Archaeological discoveries have unearthed clear evidence of social stratification. Some homes contained copper mirrors, painted ceramics, and imported goods, while others held only the most basic necessities. The wealth that flowed through Jericho created a culture of excess. Feasts and celebrations became increasingly elaborate. The ruling elite competed to display their prosperity. What began as rightful enjoyment of abundance gradually transformed into indulgence without restraint. In Jericho, wealth became intertwined with religious corruption. The city's elite used their riches to build elaborate temples dedicated to pagan deities. Gold and silver that could have alleviated suffering instead adorned statues of false gods. Precious resources funded ever more elaborate rituals designed to secure divine favor, rituals that often involved severe moral compromise. What makes Jericho's story particularly poignant is that this corruption occurred in a place of tremendous natural blessing. The city had everything it needed to thrive: fertile soil, abundant water, strategic location. These advantages should have inspired gratitude to the Creator. Instead, they fueled pride and self-sufficiency. The lesson echoes through time. Prosperity without purpose leads to moral decay. Wealth without wisdom becomes a snare. As Jesus would later teach, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? Mark 8:36. Behind Jericho's imposing walls lurked a spiritual darkness that would ultimately seal its fate. The city had abandoned the worship of the true God, embracing instead a pantheon of Canaanite deities, with Baal and Ashtoreth prominent among them. Baal worship centered around fertility rituals designed to ensure agricultural abundance. Temples dedicated to this false god became sites of profound moral corruption. The worship practices included ritual sexual acts performed by temple prostitutes, both male and female. What began as religious ceremony devolved into authorized debauchery. As we explore how Jericho's wealth led to its downfall, are you seeking wisdom for your own spiritual life? Download our free ebook from the pinned comment below. Few copies available today. Archaeological discoveries throughout the region have unearthed Ashtoreth figurines, fertility goddesses with exaggerated sexual features. These were not merely decorative items, but objects of worship kept in homes and public spaces alike. More disturbing still were the practices of child sacrifice. Excavations in other Canaanite cities have revealed the remains of infants buried in jars beneath temple foundations, evidence of the ultimate moral corruption where the gift of new life was offered to appease false gods. The scripture directly addresses these practices in Leviticus 18:24-25. Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, because this is how the nations that I am going to drive out before you became defiled. Even the land was defiled, so I punished it for its sin, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. Women in Jericho occupied a complex social position. Those connected to temple worship might enjoy certain privileges, but most existed under strict patriarchal control. Young women were sometimes dedicated to temple service, where they participated in ritual prostitution. What the inhabitants considered sacred devotion, God viewed as exploitation and abuse. The moral corruption of Jericho reflected a fundamental spiritual error, the belief that divine favor could be earned through ritual rather than righteousness. The inhabitants separated religious observance from ethical behavior, creating a society where one could participate in temple rituals by day and engage in exploitation by night. Amid Jericho's moral decay and spiritual darkness, one woman stands as a remarkable exception, Rahab. Her story represents one of the Bible's most profound examples of redemption and grace. Rahab was a prostitute whose house was built into Jericho's wall, literally on the boundary between the corrupt city and the outside world. Her position at the margin of society gave her a unique perspective. While the city's elite remained blind to approaching judgment, Rahab recognized the signs of change. When Joshua sent spies to assess Jericho's defenses, they sought shelter in Rahab's house. Rather than betraying them to the authorities, she hid the men and helped them escape. Her explanation reveals a remarkable spiritual awakening. "I know that the Lord has given you this land, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." Joshua 2:9-11. Living in a city saturated with idolatry, Rahab had somehow recognized the truth about the God of Israel. While Jericho's inhabitants trusted in walls and wealth, Rahab placed her faith in someone greater. Her decision required tremendous courage. By protecting the Israelite spies, she committed treason against her own city. By declaring faith in Israel's God, she rejected the pagan deities of her culture. She risked everything based on her conviction that the God of Israel was the true God. Rahab negotiated protection for her family in exchange for her assistance. When the walls of Jericho fell, her household alone was spared. The scarlet cord she hung from her window, reminiscent of the blood on Hebrew doorposts during Passover in Egypt, marked the boundary between judgment and mercy. Rahab's redemption didn't end with physical salvation. She was fully incorporated into the community of Israel, eventually marrying and becoming an ancestor of King David, and thus part of the lineage of Jesus Christ himself. Matthew's Gospel directly names her in the lineage of the Messiah, Matthew 1:5, which is a huge honor for a woman who used to be a prostitute in a pagan city. Her story illustrates fundamental spiritual truths. First, God's mercy extends even to those society considers beyond redemption. Second, genuine faith manifests itself in action. Rahab didn't merely profess belief, she acted on it at great personal risk. Third, God's purposes often unfold through unlikely individuals from unexpected places. Rahab's story reminds us that redemption is possible even in the darkest circumstances. Want to discover more transformative biblical truths? Our free ebook awaits in the pinned comment. Only a few copies remaining. Claim yours now before they're gone. The confrontation between Jericho and the Israelites presents one of history's most extraordinary military encounters because it defied all conventional warfare wisdom. Any military strategist would have considered Jericho virtually impregnable to ancient siege tactics. Its massive walls, strategic elevation, and internal water supply made traditional conquest nearly impossible. The divine battle plan revealed to Joshua seemed, by human standards, absurd. The Israelites were to march around the city once daily for 6 days, with 7 priests carrying ram's horn trumpets before the Ark of the Covenant. On the 7th day, they would circle Jericho 7 times. The priests would sound a long blast on the trumpets, and the people would shout. No battering rams, no siege towers, no tunneling beneath walls, just walking, trumpets, and shouting. The citizens of Jericho likely watched this peculiar procession with initial fear, then confusion, and finally contempt. Each passing day without attack probably reinforced their sense of security. On the seventh day, after the seventh circuit, Joshua commanded the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." Joshua 6:16. When the trumpets sounded and the people shouted, the seemingly impenetrable walls collapsed and the army charged straight in. Joshua 6:20. What actually happened to Jericho's mighty walls? Scholars and archaeologists have proposed various theories. Some suggest a precisely timed earthquake, noting the Jordan Valley sits on a major fault line. Others propose that the foundations of the walls had been weakened by erosion or underground water channels. For people of faith, the mechanism matters less than the meaning. However God accomplished it, the fall of Jericho demonstrated that human defenses, no matter how impressive, cannot withstand divine judgment. The walls that represented Jericho's pride and self-sufficiency became the very means of its downfall. The city was then devoted to destruction, with only Rahab and her family spared. The severity of this judgment reflects the depth of Jericho's corruption and its symbolic position as the firstfruits of Canaan, the first major obstacle to Israel's possession of the Promised Land. Joshua pronounced a curse on anyone who would rebuild the city. At the cost of his firstborn son, he will lay its foundations. At the cost of his youngest, he will set up its gates. Joshua 6:26. This prophecy was fulfilled centuries later when Heel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho during the reign of Ahab, losing his sons Abiram and Segub in the process. 1 Kings 16:34. The dramatic fall of Jericho occurred over 3 millennia ago, yet its message resonates with remarkable relevance for our contemporary world. This ancient city's story offers profound insights for modern societies and individual lives. First, Jericho warns against placing ultimate trust in human security systems. The inhabitants believed their walls made them invulnerable. Just as modern societies often trust in military might, economic strength, technological advancement, or political systems for security. Jericho reminds us that no human defense can ultimately stand against God's purposes. The psalmist captured this timeless truth. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. Psalm 127:1. True security comes not from walls we build, but from relationship with the Creator. Second, Jericho illustrates how prosperity without moral foundation leads to corruption. The city's material abundance became a catalyst for spiritual decline rather than gratitude. Today's affluent societies face similar temptations, mistaking material success for divine blessing while drifting from the very values that make civilization sustainable. The walls of Jericho teach us that no obstacle is too great when God intervenes. Hungry for more spiritual insights that apply to your life today? Our free ebook is available for download in the pinned comment. Act quickly. This special offer won't last long. Third, Jericho reveals the progressive nature of moral decay. What likely began as small compromises, minor idolatrous practices, subtle exploitation, eventually grew into systematic corruption. Similarly, ethical erosion in modern contexts rarely happens overnight. It progresses gradually as boundaries shift and consciences dull. The story also offers hope through Rahab's example. Even in the most corrupt environment, individuals can choose faith and righteousness. Regardless of past mistakes or present circumstances, redemption remains available. Rahab's integration into Israel and her place in Christ's lineage testify that God's grace extends to all who turn to Him. Perhaps most significantly, Jericho challenges us to examine the walls in our own lives. What barriers have we constructed to keep God at a distance? Pride, self-sufficiency, materialism, and moral compromise form walls that seem to offer protection but actually separate us from our Creator. The ancient city of Jericho stands as both warning and witness across the corridors of time. Its mighty walls, once the pride of its inhabitants, now lie buried beneath centuries of dust, a testament to the temporary nature of human achievements when set against eternal purposes. What seems impenetrable to human strength crumbles before divine power. What appears secure by worldly standards may prove desperately vulnerable when measured by spiritual reality. The walls we trust for protection may become the very means of our confinement. Yet amid this sobering message rises the hope embodied in Rahab, the truth that no one is beyond redemption, that faith can flourish even in the most corrupt environments, that God's mercy extends to all who recognize their need and turn to Him. If these insights resonate with you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Your super thanks support helps us create more content like this. Join our community and stay connected. The trumpets that once signaled Jericho's fall now call to us across millennia, challenging us to examine the fortresses we've built around our hearts and lives. Will we, like Jericho's inhabitants, trust in walls of our own making? Or will we, like Rahab, recognize the God before whom all human defenses ultimately fail? The choice remains as relevant today as it was when Joshua's army stood before those ancient walls. And the promise is equally enduring, that when the walls of pride and self-sufficiency finally fall, we don't find destruction, but the beginning of true life.